The story goes like this. Earth is captured by a techno-capital singularity as Renaissance rationalization and oceanic navigation lock into commoditization takeoff. Logistically accelerating techno-economic interactivity crumbles social order in auto-sophisticating machine runaway. As markets learn to manufacture intelligence, politics modernizes, upgrades paranoia, and tries to get a grip. This is the infamous first paragraph of Nick Land's 1992 text, Meltdown. But what does it actually mean? What is the techno-capital singularity? And why is techno-economic interactivity crumbling social order? Well, to start with, we should note that Meltdown is a foundational text for this philosophical movement now known as Accelerationism. As such, I think we can use it to help us understand what Accelerationism is really about. But first, techno-capital. As is probably clear, this is a portmanteau of technical and capital. This is specifically capital in a Marxian sense, as in the force which characterizes capitalism. So, techno-capital references the iteration of capitalism which advances digital technology. Land goes on to say that capital is neutralizing all values through commensuration to digitized commerce, and driving a migration from despotic command to cyber-sensitive control, from status and meaning to money and information. So this is to say that techno-capital commercialism strips down traditional social structures in favor of informationized economic networks independent of culture and hierarchy. To accelerationism, this is a positive and inevitable process. Hence, what is to be accelerated is the progression of technology and capitalism. But again, what is the techno-capital singularity? Well, it's similar to the concept of a technical singularity, in which artificial intelligence advances to a point of no return, and technology develops beyond the ability of humans to control it. The techno-capital singularity goes further, hypothesizing a point at which capitalism advances entirely beyond the need for humanity through automation and financial speculation. In Land's much more recent Introduction to Accelerationism, he states that commercialization and industrialization mutually excite each other in a runaway process. Capital has no conceivable meaning besides self-amplification. It grows in order to grow. Meltdown declares that nothing human makes it out of the near future, and Land echoes that sentiment in this interview.
If you think anything we now mean by human can survive the singularity, you're not understanding the radicality of the transition that you're talking about.
The techno-capital singularity also implies an unforeseeable endpoint of technological progress where everything fixes together in some way.
In the second Terminator movie, where this liquid metal robot seemed like defeated by cryogenizing it with this tanker of liquid hydrogen or something, and it just breaks into these fragments. As it warms up, all of these little fragments start pooling together and organizing themselves back into this machine. It seems almost definitionally unnatural that something that is in a state of dispersed, fragmented chaos, something with high entropy, undergo this negative entropic process or self-assembly process or self-organizing process, and you just see it forming back into something coherent and organized.
Land, once a lecturer of philosophy at Britain's University of Warwick, is known to be influenced by the concept of theory fiction, writing which blurs the boundaries between philosophical theory and fiction. I think this sentence near the end of Meltdown is reflective of this. Blitzed on a polydrug mix of K-Nova, synthetic serotonin, and female orgasm analogues, you have just iced 3 Turing cops with a highly cinematic 9mm automatic. I don't know about you, but I'm getting strong Blade Runner vibes here. Accelerationism isn't the only ideological current we can see the seeds of here. The statement artificial intelligence is destined to emerge as a feminized alien grasped as property, along with the indication of a coming synthetic feminization, relate to Sadie Plant's vision of cyberfeminism. Plant collaborated with Land on the 1994 text Cyberpositive, which opines that as things become more complex, they become more female, but patriarchy prolongs the ice age of mankind. Plant explains on this interview in a 1994 Virtual Futures conference.
This process of feminisation is also the great clarion cry, which really seems to again be coming from an old sort of sense of masculine identity, is summed up by, again, a guy who was on TV probably about a month ago on a programme about men, who, again, with a great tone of paranoia, said, "Women and robots are taking our jobs." And it's that dual attack which clearly suggests that there is some connection made, at least in the minds of this old power centre, between women and intelligent machines.
She later goes into more detail on why this is.
And yet it seems that woman has always been somehow in proximity to this now emerging notion of a dispersed, decentered organism. She has, after all, never had a unified role. This is the one thing which women have always been denied. She's been various things, of course: mirror, screen, commodity, means of communication, means of reproduction, carrier of water, weaver of the cloth, carer, whore, machine assemblage, in other words, in the service of the species, a sort of general purpose system of simulation and self-simulation.
So essentially, masculinity has positioned man as the sex with a defined identity, where woman is the sex whose identity is intrinsically fluid and tied to social roles. So if digitization is a process which strips down rigid and defined human identities, and femininity represents a lack of such identity, then digitization is also a process of feminization.
And suddenly, after so many years of it being woman who is one who is lacking and somehow missing something, suddenly it's masculinity, is that strong sense of identity, which becomes a liability, which becomes a lack.
From approximately 1997 to 2003, Land and Plant led a project known as the Cybernetic Cultural Research Unit, or CCRU. Other students and staff at Warwick University, notably Mark Fisher, Kodwo Ashun, and Ray Brassier, were also involved. The unit would focus on diverse topics such as philosophy, psychoanalysis, cybernetics, the occult, and jungle drum and bass. Its writings were originally to be found on a website, however they've since been compiled into a special book. The CCRU was ostensibly formed as a reaction to the institutional rigidity of the university, which was seen to be driving against innovative cultural processes. To quote the book, "We think everything interesting happens on the periphery, outside the standard modes of developed existence." So, why is it a cybernetic research unit? Well, if we return to the 1994 text, Cyberpositive, it basically intended to present an interpretation of cybernetics. In the text, Land and Plant characterized Norbert Wiener's vision of cybernetics as propaganda against positive feedback, also saying that Wiener's subliminal insight was that everything cyber-positive is an enemy of mankind. Cybernetics was itself to be kept under control. This positive feedback of cybernetics represents the advance of techno-capital, as is evidenced when they state that capitalism is replicated cyber-positively. The CCRU developed a number of concepts, notably that of digital hyperstition. Basically, hyperstition is when something that isn't real or even conceivable, and hence superstition, is brought into reality through an almost mystical process of cultural production. The review of digital hyperstition early on in the book discusses it in the context of a horror story where we arrive at a year zero, and seemingly through a non-linear interpretation of time, the human race is virtually dead. We are told that cyberhype libidinally invests its own semiotic, propagating fictional qualities, tagging artificial agencies, and making itself up as it goes along, whilst dissolving production into cultural synthesis. To read another passage, the evident cybergoth contamination throughout suggests it has been spawned in crypt-connected hyperlink labyrinths, beneath and between the net, a positive non-place lurking between the threshold where the remnants of Earth's damned hominids, whose gods are lying monsters, shorts out into an anthrobotic mix-mash of burnt silicon and terminal screams. Again, this seems directly influenced by 80s science fiction. The CCRU made predictions also. In the 1998 text Y2 Panic, it was forecast that the dating systems of digital devices would be incapable of counting above 99, and that this would lead to a cyberpunk catastrophe marked by various network crashes and elements of medical overstretch, financial chaos, transport, telecommunication and power failures, food and water shortages, disruption of government services, hoarding, rioting, and terrorism at the beginning of the year 2000. In a later text, we're told that by the end of the century, things had been so wound up by Yetuk apocalypticism that even the most extravagant socio-economic turmoil would still have been a disappointment. Ultimately, accelerationism and even cyberfeminism outlasted the CCRU by a long way. However, I think it was an interesting and perhaps necessary experiment in forms of cultural development.